What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the All In Show. This is episode 22, and I have another entrepreneur here with me in the room. Before you tune into this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it. I'm sure if you're from Pueblo or if you've been involved in the community, you know and recognize this gentleman right here. But I'm going to let this guy introduce himself. Go ahead and kind of give us a little introduction on who you are.
Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nathan Stern. I'm the co-developer of the Fuel and Iron project. We started in Pueblo renovating the historic Holmes Hardware building at 400 South Union Avenue into the Fuel and Iron Food Hall on the first floor and 28 workforce housing units on the second and third floor. Since then, we've also branched out and launched Fuel Kitchens. It's our commissary and food production facility on the east side of Pueblo, 1745 North Erie Avenue, and just generally lover of Pueblo, evangelist for Pueblo, and yeah, really happy to be talking to you today.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. And this has been something that I've been wanting to schedule for the past few weeks, so thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
I have a lot of questions I want to get answered, and I definitely want to get into the Fuel and Iron project. But you mentioned that you have another project going on the east side?
On the east side, yeah. It's called Fuel Kitchens. And we're if you take Erie Avenue north about all the way you can go until it dead ends in that cul-de-sac up against Fountain Creek. We're the furthest building on the west side of the street. So it's called Fuel Kitchens. Originally, our building was built in 1970s as a Coors distributor. Shout out to Coors. And
I love them.
Yeah, exactly. And so for the last 25 years or so, the building has been a cold and dry storage warehouse by the pallet. So one of our brokerage clients bought the building and leased it to us. And we started out just maintaining the existing business, cold and dry storage by the pallet. We raised some money. We built a commercial kitchen in there. And so now there are commissary members that use the kitchen. Some of them are makers. They have a packaged product. Some of them are food trucks. Some of them are caterers. And then we launched a co-manufacturing business within the commercial kitchen where we make products for entrepreneurs, mainly in the sauces and condiments category. We make products for about 25 different businesses, kind of anything you can think of in sauces and condiments. And that all started with the Pueblo Chamber of Commerce, actually. They make a salsa each year to give away as a promotional product, and they'd always had it made in Colorado Springs. And when we opened, finally there was a business with the capacity to make the product in Pueblo. And of course, being the Pueblo Chamber of Commerce, they wanted to have the product made in Pueblo. So we took that assignment on, and mainly we sell it to them as a promotional product, but we've also rebranded it as Genuine Pueblo and expanded it from just a medium salsa to mild, medium, and hot. And eventually we want Genuine Pueblo to be a Pueblo-grown, Pueblo-produced brand of sauces and condiments that really accentuates and promotes the Pueblo chili. We think, you go into any grocery store and there's a wall full of Hatch products, and there aren't many brands that really exemplify Pueblo chilies, and we want that to change. So we want to create a great Pueblo chili, Pueblo-centric brand. And eventually over the coming years, we want to build that. But for now, we're more focused on building the co-manufacturing business. And the cool part about that is it's really more in line with the manufacturing jobs that Pueblo, from an economic development perspective, really wants to bring in. Because co-manufacturing is nice because we can work with clients from all over the country and sometimes even all over the world. We have a business based in Seoul, South Korea, coming in at the beginning of February. It's a simple syrup. And so, that relative to the commissary, where it's great, but, you're not going to drive from Denver or from, Albuquerque or from wherever to go and make the product yourself. But for co-manufacturing, we have clients from all around the country. And so it just has a much greater growth potential than the commissary. And now it's the biggest part of our business. So we really want to grow that to a point where we're stabilized and profitable in 2026. And then once we have a little bit more breathing room from that respect, we want to really focus more on growing the Genuine Pueblo brand to where hopefully you see it on grocery store shelves around Colorado.
Man, it sounds like you got a lot of projects on your plate. And I definitely want to dive into those projects. But first, tell me about yourself, man. Are you from Pueblo?
No, and actually I've never lived full-time in Pueblo. Born and raised in Denver, lived in Denver my whole life. other than I went to undergrad in North Carolina. And my first job out of college, I worked for the State Employees Union. So also was based in the Denver office, but Pueblo is the headquarters of the union. Shout out to Colorado Winds, local 1876. And I just fell in love with Pueblo by coming down to HQ to do trainings and workshops and actions locally in the community, and love the architecture, people, community, the connectedness of everybody. The size of Pueblo is perfect. It has just about anything from an urban perspective I'd want to do, but you go to the coffee shop and you always see someone which I really love. So
Yeah.
I'd been looking for avenues to get back into Pueblo, and done things here and there, bought a couple of like a triplex and a fourplex and sold those. But mainly, the way that I was able to reconnect with Pueblo was through the Fuel and Iron project in the Holmes Hardware building. In the interim, I had worked as a commercial real estate broker representing restaurants, and there's a food hall in Denver called Avanti, and it's an incubator food hall for chefs in Denver. And we didn't have anything to do with that project itself, but at one point we were working with 4 out of the 7 chefs in Avanti, helping them find their first brick and mortar location, because that was everyone's goal coming into the food hall, and really just became a big believer in the incubator food hall model, and felt like every community should have one, because there are entrepreneurial chefs everywhere, and opening a restaurant is expensive everywhere. And so having a kitchen where you can just basically walk into without a long-term lease, try a concept. If it works, great. It can be the launch pad to expand into a brick and mortar. And if it doesn't, and you realize it's not for you, or for whatever reason the concept's not successful, you're not under the barrel of a huge lease with a personal guarantee that you need to find a way to get out of. So we wanted to open our own food hall, because being a broker is great, but it's very transactional. You help a client sign a lease, get a commission, but then it's always on to the next one. So we wanted a more long-term project that we could build some equity in and really invest in a community. And for me, that community has always been Pueblo, where I wanted to come back to and invest into. It was just all about finding the right site. And we actually found out about the Holmes Hardware building on the PEDCO website, that it was available, and negotiated with the owner and was able to put it under contract and ultimately close on it, and the rest is history. But my dream is to someday move to Pueblo. All of our family's in Denver, and so it's hard to think about leaving when our kids are still young and we have all of our extended family there. But eventually the goal is to move to Pueblo.
You threw a lot of big words at me, and that's okay. I'm still in my financial education dive where I'll learn those words. But you said you got your undergraduate, so you went to college. What did you go to school for?
My major was called Management and Society, and I picked it because it was interesting and really broad. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do with my life, and my uncle was really involved in the labor movement, and that's how it kind of got on my frame of reference. And so that I did an internship between my junior and senior year of college with the Service Employees International Union, which was a union that my uncle was with, and Colorado Winds was a partnership between SEIU and a couple of other unions. And they were hiring because at that point, state employees had just gained the right to organize. And so it was a big pool of 30,000 employees that, there weren't just that many opportunities around the country with a newly authorized group of public employees that could organize. And so the labor movement was putting a lot of money into it and really ramping up the staff. And I graduated college in 2009, so it was a Great Recession then. And so having the opportunity to, find a job just period and something I was passionate about was great. And I didn't really have a vision for where I wanted my career to go. And that seemed as good an option as any. And I still have some good friends from Colorado Winds today, even though the labor movement wasn't my ultimate, passion as a career. But it was a great place to start. And that was the way that I got connected with Pueblo in the first place.
Interesting. So it sounds like you went to school for something completely different than what you're actually involved in today.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not sure the professional applications, honestly, for my degree, just because it was so broad and theoretical. But, I think there were some really interesting classes that I'm sure have influenced the way that I look at the world, but it wasn't a direct training for, anything that I'm doing in real estate or food or even entrepreneurship.
Did you ever take like an economics class?
I did. Yeah, I took economics was the biggest discipline that we took, but it was all kind of like theoretical economics, and I don't think it wasn't anything like practical or related to business. So I don't know how much I'm putting. I mean, it was really interesting to learn about these topics, but I don't think I'm putting them into practice too much now in my day to day life.
I would say differently. I would say having at least some foundational knowledge of economics helps an entrepreneur like yourself know about, times of recession and times of progression and what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I mean, there's probably some more influence than I realize in that that framework.
So, after you get out of college, what did you do?
So then I moved back to Denver. So my wife and I were in a long distance relationship all through undergrad, and that was about enough of that. 3.5 years. We studied abroad together for one semester, which was great. Otherwise, we were long distance, and so she had moved. She went to Colorado State. She's a math teacher, and she had moved back to Denver for her final semester student teaching. So it was pretty clear that I was going to move back to Denver. And my first job was with the state employees union. And so what ended up happening, kind of like big picture economically, was when the recession hit in 2008, then suddenly the private sector payrolls were really hit in 2009. And that had some reverberations to the state budget then in 2010, where there were a ton of cuts in the state and people were trying to save money however they could. And so membership began going down in the union, both from layoffs and from people dropping their membership. And that led to layoffs within the union itself. So I was laid off in April of 2011 from the union. And then meanwhile, even before January, I had gone back to school to study business and urban planning at CU Denver. So I was already in school. And then I worked with the owners of Solar Roast to launch Solar Roast on the road. We licensed their branding. So we had a coffee truck in Denver from 2011 to 2015 that was Solar Roast on the road. So I was in school and running the coffee truck. And then I graduated grad school in 2013. And then I started working as a commercial real estate broker right after that.
So, shortly after this period is when you got into commercial real estate brokering. Am I putting that verbiage correctly?
Yeah, and what had happened when I was going through grad school is that I was studying urban planning. It was a really exciting period in Denver at that point because there was, the Fast Tracks project and the light rail line was expanding pretty rapidly, and there's just a lot more interest in living in city close neighborhoods. So a lot of neighborhoods were really developing within Denver, and a lot of really interesting businesses and restaurants were opening up. So it was great. On the other hand, right after the recession, there wasn't a lot of new projects that were actually getting built because just money was so tight, and it was a real estate crash, and so there wasn't a lot of new real estate development. So it just felt like all of these station area plans that were coming out and all of these neighborhood plans that were coming out, were these amazing plans. They envisioned these beautiful, dense neighborhoods, but then there wasn't a lot of private development activity on the back end that actually densifying those neighborhoods and building anything new or even renovating historic buildings. And I just started thinking, if I could find one project and have some direct influence on it getting accomplished, that would be more fulfilling than creating a plan but being helpless to see anyone actually follow through and develop according to the plan. And so I started changing my focus from urban planning to real estate. And CU Denver didn't really have any real estate courses, but CU Boulder has a pretty good program. So I took a few classes up there. And meanwhile, I was doing the coffee truck, and people were reaching out to me and saying, hey, I've got a vacant space in such and such a building. Would you consider opening a coffee shop in there? Are you looking to expand? because there was really high vacancy following the Great Recession. And so I got really into thinking about, would this space be a good space for a coffee shop, and retail and food and beverage becoming my main focus. And I wanted to get into real estate development straight away after I graduated, but it's just so hard to get right into development when jobs were few and far between, and I didn't have any experience or good connections in development. But the nice part about brokerage is it's 100% commission. So it's pretty easy to get your foot in the door because nobody's paying you anything. So I was able to start with a retail and food and beverage focused brokerage firm rather than jump into development straight away. But it was always on my mind that I really wanted to eventually do a project of my own.
So, being a real estate broker, did you have to get your real estate license?
Yes, the licensing is identical, whether you're residential or commercial. It's all the same real estate license.
What's the difference between, like, is it like you're a real estate agent or you're a real estate broker? Is there a difference between the two?
No, those are really interchangeable. The to call yourself a realtor, there's like the National Association of Realtors, and it's a trade association, and you have to belong to call yourself a realtor. But there's no difference whether I could have, with my license, done residential, done commercial, done any type of commercial. I would advise against it because even though it's the same license, the skill set is pretty different and the knowledge base is pretty different. But technically, from a licensing perspective, I could have done any sort of brokerage.
How is it different?
I think the residential brokerage is really based a lot on emotion and speed, and commercial brokerage is a lot more based on math and numbers and cap rates and those type of concepts. So it's just a very, very different type of ability to thrive in that. And I tried to do a residential deal fairly early on in my career, and we offered a number below the asking price that for a commercial deal would have been completely normal. And worst case scenario, the seller would have just said no thank you or would have countered. But in this case, the seller was really offended that we had offered that amount, and she just said, I'm not working with these people. And we lost the opportunity to negotiate and to purchase the property. And from then on, I said, all right, I'm going to stay away from doing anything residential.
Interesting. I did not know the difference. Well, I wasn't educated as far as like the two different routes. So when you say knowledge base and skill set base between the two, what do you mean by that?
Well, and I would even take it a step further for us, for what we did, because even if you take commercial, there's a bunch of subsets within commercial, right? So there you could do office, you could do multifamily, you could do industrial, you could do land, you could do retail. And so we did retail, but even within retail, there's a huge a number of different subfields that you could go into. And so let's just say 80 to 90% of brokers do residential and 10 to 20% do commercial. So already, you're eliminating the vast majority of the brokers out there who focus mainly on residential. So then even within, the let's say the 15%, now maybe 10% of that 15% does mainly retail. So, now you're at 1.5% of the total agents out there. And even in that 1.5%, you have some that, there's a brokerage firm that just does medical, only medical within retail spaces, dentists, doctors, chiropractors, that sort of thing. You could do medical, you could do mainly, fitness, you could do soft goods, you could do food and beverage. And there are different distinctions there. And then even within those categories, there are some brokers that mainly represent landlords. We mainly represented tenants. So even there's a distinction. So, you start to, really narrow it down. And there were maybe a dozen or two brokers that really did what we did, which is food and beverage tenant representation. And so in terms of skill set, there are just some things with food and beverage that, you don't have to worry about in other types of brokerage. So, is there a grease trap? Is there a hood? Is it a type 1 hood or a type 2 hood? Is there enough power? What's the HVAC like? How old are the units? Have they been serviced? What type of signage do you have? What type of parking do you have? What type of visibility do you have? Is it on the going to work side of the road or the going home from work side of the road? And honestly, I didn't practice. I've not practiced brokerage since COVID, but now that fewer people are coming into the office and more people are working from home, that's a whole new calculus around what type of spaces make sense for food and beverage businesses. So there's just a very specialized skill set. And what's nice about specializing is that if we toured a restaurant space and with a client and for whatever reason they passed on it, we probably had another client or two that if we really liked and believed in the space, even if it didn't work for client A, it might be a great fit for client B or client C. Whereas being more of a generalist, you could do all of this work for a client. And sometimes it wasn't even that they didn't like the space. Is that, hey, I was counting on an SBA loan and I didn't get it and I can't move forward. I was counting on an investor to come through and they didn't come through, so I can't move forward. I got offered this amazing job. I was going to open my own restaurant, but then I got offered this amazing job, my dream job in another city. And I'm going to take that and not move forward. A million different things could happen where a chef might decide now's not the time to make a move. And if, or any type of business owner. And if you're focused on looking at properties that are so specialized for a certain type of business and you don't have any other clients in that same type of business, then it's super easy just to lose all that work. Whereas we were just so focused on really like second generation, meaning there was a restaurant there before, restaurant spaces that if it didn't work for one restaurant or one chef, we would normally have at least one other business, if not multiple, that we could show it to. So it made our lives a lot easier.
So, what was I getting at? Less competition, more demand, a lot of speculation is what's going on in the commercial side.
Yes, definitely less competition. Everyone could be a home buyer, but there are only a much smaller number of people that, want to open a restaurant or want to open a commercial business. With that being said, there are certain spaces, if, they're like a small footprint with infrastructure in a great neighborhood, those could still be really competitive. But by and large, it's not like every space is competitive. Like, sometimes every house seems like it's competitive at the top of the market. And, definitely it's more speculative because, when you go into a house, you kind of know you're going to live there. Whereas, when you're opening a business in a space, you don't know whether it's going to work or not. Even if it's a very established business, you still don't know for sure if it's going to work in a particular location. And so, yeah, definitely a lot more speculative.
So, when you first started, how much risk did you take going into this career field? Did you take a lot of risk, a lot of gamble on a certain commercial property that you believed in?
When I was a broker, the risk is kind of like an opportunity cost because you're not, you're not, when the client is the one that signs the lease, you don't sign the lease. So you're not taking any risk for their business. You get paid generally as a broker half when the lease is signed, half when the tenant opens for business. So as long as they open, even if the business doesn't work out fairly immediately, you still get paid. So you're not taking risk in that respect. But I think anytime you take an 100% commission job, you're taking the risk of not doing enough deals, not making enough income relative to having a salary job where you know what you're going to get paid. Of course, there are risks there, and there can be some big rewards in commission-based jobs as well, depending on the job. But you're definitely taking a risk in investing your time and not knowing what the reward is going to be. But it wasn't nearly as risky as when you go into a business as a principal, and if it doesn't work out, then you could lose everything, and that's kind of the situation that I've transitioned to as a principal, where the stakes are a lot higher.
So when you're going into a deal, is it a combination of finding the good connections and so number one, when you make a deal and you're in a spot where you can't fund this situation, is it more so I gotta find the connections to finance this deal, or Well, a combination of both. So that and doing your own research and development on this project. Is it a combination of both of those when it comes into finding, this deal or this project that you're gonna, invest your time into?
Oh, well, when the main project that we've invested into, the Fuel and Iron project, we really believed that a food hall could be successful in different markets. We had set parameters that we were looking for in a building. And, so we when we found the Holmes Hardware building on the first floor, it checked all the boxes we were looking for. And we had run projections with a consultant who had opened other food halls about how we thought the food hall would do. So we had a lot of conviction that that was the right spot and that it would work. However, in the case of that building, we had there were two upper floors in the Holmes Hardware building. We anticipated we'd only find a single story building, and the numbers just didn't work without just saying, okay, well, we'll figure out what to do with the upper floors later. In order for the numbers to work, we had to build out the upper floors, and we had to start generating income from the upper floors right away. So our first idea there was to do a boutique hotel in the upper floors, but then we started working on that in 2019, and then COVID hit, and we thought, okay, it would be hard enough funding one food and beverage entertainment business when pretty much all of those businesses were shut down because of the pandemic, let alone two. So then we pivoted to, okay, what would be another good use for those upper floors? And workforce housing really stood out because we had seen in Denver that as downtown really developed, the employees who worked at downtown businesses had to commute from further and further away to be able to work there because they couldn't afford to live downtown. And we said, okay, well, Pueblo is still relatively affordable, but if we do workforce housing, we can really, trap the affordability or preserve would be a better word, preserve the affordability long term for those units. And so that just logically, was a much more stable and promising strategy after COVID hit for the upper floors. So, that part was totally happenstance in terms of we didn't go into the project expecting to have housing on top of the food hall. But in the end, the housing has been the much more stable and predictable part of the project rather than the food hall. And so in retrospect, it was very lucky that we ended up building housing, but that wasn't how we came into it at the time. And then in terms of funding, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 different funding sources between the residential and the commercial. We had to create two separate condos because the funders for the residential didn't want to fund the commercial. And so, that part also, wasn't what we expected or anticipated. I think we're hoping that, we'd have one lender that would fund everything in addition to the equity that we were bringing to the table, which was mainly in the form of historic tax credits and some affordable housing equity. We're hoping, oh, well, we'll get a single lender, they'll make us a loan, we'll call it a day. And that's not how it happened at all. We really had to cobble together the funding. So, I think part of it was intentional. We were really intentional about the criteria we used to select a building for the food hall. And then a lot of it, we just, figured it out over time as we got into the project. These things had to happen to make it work. And so we just really believed in the project and we wanted to make them happen. Hello.
Hello, I'm back.
Welcome back.
I had to go pee. Sorry, guys. We're back. So you got into a lot of detail about the Fuel and Iron project, and there's a lot to decode from that in just one conversation. But I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to ask you questions pertaining to the Fuel and Iron project. So we'll just dive into that. So you mentioned that it was two separate, not deals, but two separate words, residential and commercial. So was the bottom half commercial and the top portion was residential?
Exactly. Yeah. First floor, all commercial. Second and third floors, all residential. There's a full basement in the building, and there's some space within the basement, both for the food hall and for the residential units. But the first through third floor are single use. I guess on the first floor, there is a little apartment lobby, about 500 or so square feet. That's for the residential. And the reason why we did that is that if we had the lobby being on the basement level, then we would have had a 4-story building. And when you get above 3 stories, there's a lot more code requirements than if you have a 3-story building with a basement. So having the lobby on the first floor is really strategic. So we didn't have all of those more stringent code requirements, which would have come with a lot of cost.
I see. So when I first saw this project happen, this building was almost abandoned, right?
It was, yeah. I mean, it really hadn't been fully utilized since the late 70s when the Holmes Hardware Company was in the building. But yeah, it was totally empty when we started working on the building.
So why would you bring something like that here to Pueblo instead of Denver? You mentioned it had 16 or 17 different lenders. Which was it?
It was, I believe, 17 total. One lender was they're called Leaf. They were like a just equipment financing company, and that would make 17.
I see. So what makes you bring something like that here to Pueblo instead of Denver when if you would have started in Denver, I would think it would have fewer lenders just because Pueblo is a smaller town. It makes sense that there would be 17 lenders because you don't have enough lenders to be able to be like, hey, yeah, I'm going to give you $10 million. I'm just putting a number out there to refurbish this home, refurbish this commercial real estate deal, and do everything that you plan on doing. So why would you bring it to Pueblo instead of Denver?
I would say 3 reasons. One reason is I just love Pueblo. The second reason is we found the right building in Pueblo that met all of our criteria. And, they just don't build them like that anymore. All of the historic buildings in downtown Denver were developed in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, maybe late 80s. But, to be able to find a vacant building of that size and that character just wouldn't happen in Denver. So that was also a very important component to it. Another reason, I guess I have four total reasons. Reason number 3 is that downtown Denver especially was very saturated with food halls, and we didn't want to open just another food hall that would compete with Avanti and all of the other existing food halls. We did look at other markets within Denver, like other Denver neighborhoods, Denver suburbs, also looked at Fort Collins, Colorado Springs. But the other advantage that Pueblo has is just relatively lower cost of acquiring real estate. So we paid $76 a foot for the Holmes Hardware building, and it included 2 acres of land that we eventually want to develop on. Just as one comp, we looked at a school in Fort Collins called the Harmony School that was along Harmony and Timberline Road, which would be a good part of Fort Collins to open in, but the cost of the school was $350 a foot. And we just didn't see how we could have. I mean, the amount of volume that we would have needed to have done in Fort Collins would have been, just because the real estate price was so much higher, it would have far exceeded the amount of volume we need to do in Pueblo, or needed to do in Pueblo. And so that was a criteria as well.
That's a lot of good information that you just gave me. So with this specific deal, how long did it take you to actually get the numbers right, get the lenders right, get all your, P's and Q's in order to make sure this was detailed as possible to bring to a lender so that way you can secure the financing? How long did it take you for that?
We started looking at the building fourth quarter of 2019. Call it October 2019 or so was when we first toured the building and put in a letter of intent with the current owner to purchase it. We put the building under contract March 3rd, 2020, so 2 weeks before everything shut down with the pandemic. We closed on the real estate in May of 2021, and we closed on our financing in October of 2021. So, total is about 2 years between when we started looking at or negotiating over the building and when we finally were able to close on our financing and begin construction in earnest. And one thing I just want to say about that is we got kind of lucky that we did it that way. Essentially, the seller was losing patience, as you might imagine, after putting their building under contract for about 15 months and not being able to close. And we got an extension to the contract to move it to May of 2021. And the seller basically said, that's the last extension you're going to get. Either close or we're going to terminate. And we just knew that we were not going to be able to close on all of our financing, because what a lot of funders means is a lot of lawyers and a very complicated closing process. And so the only way for us to move forward was to buy the building with some interim financing and just hold it until we could close on our permanent financing. The advantage of doing it that way was that we bought the whole site with our interim financing, and then our permanent financing only encumbered 2 out of our 4 parcels. So there's the parcel with the historic building, and then we have a parking lot in the middle of the site. And when the temporary financing was paid off, the 2 adjacent parcels that we have that aren't part of the first phase, those were, now we own them free and clear, because the interim financing that encumbered those 2 parcels was paid off, and the permanent financing was only focused on the scope of the construction project, which didn't include those 2 parcels. So it just gives us more freedom to develop those 2 ancillary parcels without needing to get buy-in from our existing lenders.
Were you the only partner involved in this deal?
No, I have a one other general partner. His name is Zach. So we developed it together. Zach still runs our brokerage business. That's how he spends most of his time. And I'm focused on our development businesses. So in a lot of ways, we're partners economically, but not, on an activity basis, just because we have our separate focuses. But he's been my partner throughout the whole project.
Did you guys have to leverage any debt to be able to fund this deal?
Yes. I mean, we have a total of about $8 million of debt.
What do you think the return, what is the return on investment for that? What is the projected, I don't know the exact word, maybe you can help me on it, projected, I guess, I'm going to say profit in the next 10 years to be able to eliminate that debt? What was that number you saw, like, hey, if we invested this much and now we have 8 million in debt, how are we going to pay this off within the next few years?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is the time horizon is a lot further out to repay the debt. For our commercial debt, we have a 25-year amortization. So best case scenario, we pay it off in 25 years. And for the residential debt, we have a 35-year amortization. So really looking at long term. Thus far, the food hall has not been profitable yet, and the apartments are profitable, but only to a small extent, because since they're affordable housing, the rents that we can charge are limited, so they're almost always going to be full. We'll almost always make a small profit off the apartments, but not to the level that a market rate deal would do if it was fully leased. So it's interestingly, that thus far the return that we've been able to give to our investors has largely been a return through both the depreciation of the building. You take a loss through depreciation and operating losses through the businesses, and so they've been able to have tax losses that they can apply to their income and earn a little bit of a return that way, but we have not yet been able to provide a financial return. So it's really hard to know if and when that will change, but it's a longer time horizon than we were anticipating to be able to generate a financial return.
I think when you're investing into something like this big of a project, it's always going to have a long-term horizon. Right. It's like investing into the stock market. For someone like me, I don't know a lot. So my goal for sure, by the time I'm 40, I want to be able to have a lump sum of money by strategic investing over the next 40 years to be able to have that lump sum of money. So what I'm saying is I see it as a long-term investment, not, just pay me quick cash is what I'm getting at. But as far as this, you mentioned that it depreciates. When you buy real estate, doesn't it appreciate?
Well, there's a difference between the like accounting depreciation and the actual value of the property. So I am definitely not an accountant, but the money that we invested into the project, a lot of that gets capitalized, but the value, just like with any piece of equipment, the value of it depreciates over time. Even if you could sell it for a market profit, from an accounting perspective, it always depreciates. So there's always, I think it's a 40-year time horizon for real estate. Fact check me on that, because this is not my area of expertise. But you can write off the value that we put into the project over that 40-year timeline. That's kind of considered the useful life for like the building systems and the construction work that we put into the building. So yes, hopefully that eventually we'll be able to sell the building for a profit when that happens. I mean, that's not on the horizon now, but hopefully eventually that will happen. Either pass it down or sell it at a profit. But even so, even if it's immensely profitable, there's still book depreciation just based off the value that we put into it over the useful life. Is on a fixed schedule. So it's not, it really has nothing to do with whether the market value of the property goes up or down.
When we talk about these businesses inside Steel and Iron, and you say some of them aren't profiting as much as others, at least from a localist perspective, this is what I see. There's been a lot of businesses come in. There's been businesses that have stayed since they've opened, and then there's been some that has left. Do you think that's due to like the demand of their product, or just the fact that they're not, being able to keep up with profits?
Well, I think it's a whole mix of things, factors. So if you look at the businesses in the food hall, there's one, Hungry Buffalo, been there from the beginning, one out of the 6 spaces, and of course the bar. There have been 2 restaurants that have left to open their own brick and mortars, which was the intention. Cutting Board, which is on Union Avenue, and then Union Pizza, which is going to be at Tavola in the old Rosario space on Highway 50. And then Diavolo, which, rather than opening their own brick and mortar, they just opened the concept within Bingo Burger because that was their existing restaurant. And I think that had more to do with where the owners were at in their life and just wanting to scale back a little bit from, having multiple locations to just having a single location. So all of those, I would say were success stories that really achieved the goals that the food hall set out to achieve, which was providing the launching pad for restaurants to open their own brick and mortar locations, because we didn't want the restaurants to be in the food hall forever. The intention was always to have a lot of turnaround. And with that being said, there have been a few concepts that haven't worked out, where for one reason or another they weren't doing the volume that they needed to either sustain in the food hall or to open their own brick and mortar location. And I think if you look at the success rate of food and beverage businesses as a whole, especially independent ones, the success rate of the chefs at the food hall probably is not that different from the industry as a whole. I think that the difference is just that it's way less expensive to get in and way less expensive to get out of the food hall versus, opening a restaurant somewhere else.
That makes sense. If you're comfortable right there, you can just pull the mic towards you a little closer. Yeah, that works.
Cool.
So I've talked with you before, and I mean, this isn't necessarily undisclosed. This has been like pretty open to the general community. I mean, it's probably been on the Chieftain. So you got out of the quote unquote restaurant business of, operating those, or whatever your form of job was within that, and now you just own the whole building in general, correct?
Correct.
So what was the switch up there?
Well, mainly just realized I am not very well suited to run a restaurant. I mean, that's the bottom line. I wasn't very good at it. And moreover, commuting from Denver, it's a business that is just super beneficial to be more present for. So the owners now, not only do they own the food hall as a whole, but they run now 3 out of the 6 concepts within the food hall. And so there's just some economies of scale there with labor management and just presence that I could never achieve. And I think they're doing a great job and really taking the food hall to a new level. And we our skill set is just not in running a restaurant. And I think that another thing that went into it in addition to that was we had opened the kitchen and fuel kitchens March of 2024, and just I see fuel kitchens as ultimately long term a bigger opportunity, mainly because let's just say Fuel and Iron Food Hall is super successful year over year. Probably that means it's growing 10 to 20%. And when the food hall maxes out, when if we want to grow beyond that, the solution would be oh, let's go open another food hall, or and you wouldn't want to open another food hall right next to the existing food hall. It would need to open in another market. And I don't want to open something in another market. Whereas Fuel Kitchens being a B2B business, everything could be centralized in Pueblo. So if and when we outgrow our current facility and we need a bigger facility for production, we could also have that facility be in Pueblo. Like, it's actually more efficient to have your existing facility be next to your new facility. And so I like I like that Fuel Kitchens is a little bit more aligned with the economic development philosophy of Pueblo, and long term, can keep all of the jobs in Pueblo, and can kind of be that primary job creator, because right now we have one co-manufacturing client who lives in Colorado Springs. We have a few that live in Denver, but most everybody's out of state. So you're really bringing that economic activity to Pueblo. Whereas at the food hall, even though we did get a decent number of tourists and visitors who would come to the food hall, most of the business were members of the local community, which is great in its own respect. But I like the idea of being able to bring business to Pueblo and introduce people to Pueblo that, coming from the Bay Area or New Jersey or, Michigan, would have never heard of the community.
I like that take you have right there. Pueblo was actually going to be the capital of Colorado until the flood because of the Industrial Revolution. We were producing just an enormous amount of steel for the nation at the time, but then the flood happened. But going back and looking on that history, I don't think Pueblo would have been the right spot for a capital, just because of our geographic location. We're in a part of Colorado where I wouldn't say everything's flat, but it's dry, it's hot, and everything just looks boring to say. Whereas like Denver, you're it's a commute everywhere you go compared to Pueblo, but it's an easier drive to go to Red Rocks or go to the mountains. You can see the mountains right there. Not that you can't see it from here, but you have more access to go to, mountainous terrain if you wanted to in Denver. And Denver is just a bigger location for, a capital for that kind of population. But enough about that rant. So when people open up a restaurant business in Fuel and Iron, do they still have to rent out to you? Do they have to have any kind of communication with you when they do that?
No. So now if the individual chefs who rent a restaurant in Fuel and Iron rent from the current owners of the food hall, who also run Wings on Wheels and the coffee shop and Custom Cravings and the Comfort Food restaurant in Kitchen One. So the other chefs pay rent to the owners of the food hall. The owners of the food hall in turn pay rent to us.
I see how that works right there. You just kind of broke that down for the next question I had for you, so I appreciate you doing that. I don't know a lot about any of this. The whole field of real estate, commercial real estate, what it takes to, own like a multi-unit or a commercial deal like this. So just having that knowledge that you have, being able to tell me and tell the people watching is very beneficial. Is this the first big project you have been a part of?
Yes, first and only. I mean, Fuel Kitchens was a renovation project in a sense because we built the kitchen, but everything else was there in the building. We kind of built out a corner of the building, whereas for Fuel and Iron, we built out the entire building plus the parking lot, curb and gutter, all of it. So it was about 10 times as big of a project as Fuel Kitchen. So yeah, it's the biggest. By far the biggest project I've been a part of, and likely the biggest for the foreseeable future.
Do you own any other assets? Are you involved in any other real estate deals?
No, other than the two parcels that we talked about that are adjacent to the food hall that we want to do additional housing on, we own the land there, but otherwise we don't own anything. Anything else.
So, if you're comfortable with answering this question, is this how you pay your bills?
So I pay my bills a few different ways. Number one is through. So we have the brokerage business. So that's one way, and then the other way is through managing the apartment, the community, and getting a management fee for managing the apartment community. That's how I pay my bills right now between those two. I'm not taking any money out of Fuel Kitchens, and basically all the rent that we get from the chefs at Fuel and Iron, the owners of Fuel and Iron, the food hall, just go to pay building expenses. So there's nothing that I'm taking from that either.
Nice, man. I'm going to shift topics a little bit. I want to kind of get to know you, dive inside that knowledge brain of yours. What kind of a routine do you have on a day to day? What does your daily routine look like?
So I have 3 kids, and so the day starts with getting the kids up, getting them to school. I'm generally in Pueblo one day a week, generally on Wednesdays, and then the rest of the time I have a co-working space where I have a desk at in Denver that I work at. I'm a terrible work from home person. I'm too easily distracted. So normally I'm Pueblo one day a week, Denver 4 days a week. Most of what I do for Fuel Kitchens is sales and business development. And because most of our clients are not local, it's mainly Zoom calls and emails and not face-to-face meetings. The last 2 days I was in San Diego for the Winter Fancy Fair conference. It's a big natural food products conference. The goal there was to meet entrepreneurs who have products in the sauces and condiments categories that would potentially be interested in using Fuel Kitchens as their co-manufacturer. So I go to about 4 of those shows a year. But generally I'm either in Denver, working away in the co-working space, or in Pueblo. And then, during the afternoon, there's kid pickup, kid activities, and, the weekends as well, by and large.
Yeah. Did you find any good prospects in San Diego?
Yeah, a lot of good prospects. And one thing that's so interesting is that a lot of the products that we can do that are the best prospects aren't necessarily the ones that I would have imagined. Meaning, the salsas, salad dressings, barbecue sauces, those were the type of products that I imagined that we would be making when we got into this. But, there's products like popsicles, or products like popcorn, sea moss gel, queso, the chutney, all probably the biggest product that we have conversations about is chili oil, or it's also called chili crisp. So there are just a lot of different products that I wouldn't necessarily have thought would be good fits, but lo and behold, they when we look at what equipment is required, what processes are required, they are actually things that we can do, and that's part of the fun.
Interesting. Do you guys use any like chili products from Pueblo for you guys' condiments?
Yeah, so most of the time our clients, when they're ordering, they're not from Pueblo, and so they're not using Pueblo chilies generally. Their formulation, is more like jalapenos or serranos, or those type of, more kind of universal chilies. But for our salsa that we do at the chamber, we use Pueblo chilies from Millburger Farms. And, the hope is that as we become more established And as clients are formulating new products, they might look at using Pueblo chilies because the products are made here. But it's hard, with them not being from Pueblo and the Pueblo chili not being too well known outside of Colorado. It's not as much of a differentiator for them as it is for us with our salsa, and so it's probably not going to be a huge percentage of clients that'll use Pueblo chilies in their sauces and condiments, but we do hope there will be a growing number.
Man, I hope so. I love Pueblo chili. I love the chili products we have here. I had Joey Musso on, and he's now doing a slopper box, which is a genius idea, and it's going nationwide now. So I'm super happy for him.
And hopefully he'll be making that at Fuel Kitchens.
Really, I'd love to see it. I would love to see that collaboration. It's such a good product. I taste tested it once I got home. As soon as I got home, I made sloppers, and oh my god, man, dude, I loved it. It was so good. I mean, I can't say enough. I can't say enough good things about that product right there, because kiss to the gods. It was, I don't know if it's just me being from Pueblo and being biased and, loving sloppers, because nobody else in the nation, in the world, knows about sloppers besides Pueblo, it seems like. But that's okay. But going back into your daily routine. So a lot of successful entrepreneurs have like a specific morning routine they stick to just get their mind right in the morning. Is that something you have in the morning? Do you wake up early in the morning? Do you meditate? Do you journal, set goals? What do you do in the morning?
I don't. I honestly, I don't. I don't have a very intentional morning routine, other than wake up, take a shower, get the kids off to school, and then start the day.
That surprises me, man. But I like to hear it, because I like hearing that different perspective from a successful entrepreneur, because it gives me hope. You hear a lot of these success stories. I wouldn't say success stories. These motivational speakers. They're like, you got to get up at 4:30 in the morning. You got to go for a run, get your mind right. You got to do X, Y, and Z to be able to have a successful day, right? You hear it all the time.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with it. You know what I mean? It's like, I definitely, I think all of those things would be helpful. It's just, not something that I'm personally doing at this point in my life.
But it also sounds like you're a busy man, you're a family man, so you have different priorities set for the morning.
True. Yeah, I think I hope that when either the kids are self-sufficient, they can get themselves up and ready, or that even they can be home alone. It would be great to exercise, go to the gym, do that kind of thing in the morning. Normally my wife is the one who goes to the gym in the morning, so I'm just holding down the fort at home. But yeah, someday I think that'll flip.
Maybe in the future. I mean, it's all a long-term game, right? Life is just a long-term game. You're just playing in the moment, and it's all based off, your actions that you take within your day-to-day routine, week-to-week routine, month-to-month routine,
For sure.
So, speaking about your mindset and your goals, do you have a certain inner circle that you hang out with to be able to bring you to that next level? Or do you still bust balls with old friends from back in the day? What kind of people do you hang out with now?
Yeah, I think the one kind of normal social ish event that I do each week is I play on a soccer team. So yeah, every week, playing soccer. Sometimes we'll get beers after the game. So that's kind of like the people on my team are just kind of like a normal weekly hangout. Definitely have some old friends that I see. And then, a lot of it is now the parents of kids' friends, doing play dates with them and hanging out with the parents, and hanging out with our neighbors as well, especially the neighbors that have kids. So yeah, just definitely some old friends, and then but a lot of the socializing is around the parents of friends of the parents of my kids' friends. Like New Year's, we hung out with a couple of the my middle kids, the couple of guys on his soccer team, their parents, because we see them for that. He has practice 3 days a week for an hour and a half, and then a game, every Saturday during the season. So we spend a lot of quality time with those families, and really like them, a lot more than we spend with friends that maybe like old friends back in the day, or even new friends, because it's more around kids' activities and just like pure socialization.
Yeah. I like that, man. That's again a different point of view than what I was imagining. Do you try to hang out with people who level you up or have the same goals as you?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Try to associate professionally with a lot of people in the industry, both food and beverage, and yeah, with real estate. I would say the personal friends, just mainly people I enjoy being around. Kind of like fill my bucket from an emotional perspective, not necessarily like, people who I aspire to be like professionally, even though that is the case a lot. Or I guess, my personal friends are in all different types of industries. They're not necessarily like concentrated in real estate or food and beverage.
Yeah.
And so it's not as much of being drawn to hanging personally with, people who I can build professional connections with, but definitely on a professional level, yeah, try to keep those connections.
That's an important point you bring up because that's something I feel like young entrepreneurs don't necessarily fully grasp. They, again, see all this stuff on social media, which is a big part in, if you're trying to level up your life, you see a lot of motivational stuff on social media. But they're always talking about how you got to hang around with people who think alike, who have the same goals. But you just brought up a good point where you got to create a emotionally balanced life where you hang around people that just bring you joy and you enjoy being around, but also hang around people. If you're trying to go down a professional route, you should probably hang around them because they'll help you level up in that professional field. So that's a very good take you have right there.
Yeah, I've always I've I think I have always kept a little bit of distance between like professional colleagues and personal friends, and maybe more than I should have. With a lot of my professional colleagues who have the same goals in real estate, where it is all about, leveling up, it's more about, hey, let's get coffee during the day, or, let's get a beer for happy hour, that type of thing. Not like, hey, let's go hang out on the weekends. The people who I generally hang with on the weekends, yeah, the more personal friends who bring me joy more than people who necessarily have the same professional goals or even personal goals. It's more about common interests and and just enjoying being around them than like shared goals or shared industries. And the other thing I should mention is I'm also really involved in my synagogue in Denver. So I teach religious school on Sundays and go to a lot of programs there. So a lot of the socializing also takes place there.
Nice, dude. That's so you're a religious man?
I'm definitely active within my synagogue. It's not. It's a level of Judaism called Reform Judaism, and so it's not what would be considered more Orthodox Judaism, where I follow all of the commandments as they're written in the Torah. But it's but I am very involved communally, so I'm very religiously active and religiously attuned, but I'm not super observant, meaning following all the commandments.
Okay. So I have a quote I just pulled up, and I want you to give me your take on this quote. Let me zoom this in. It is command what? Command plus, right? Oh, yep. Ba-ba-ba-bow. So Albert Einstein had this quote, and I want you to give me your take on this quote as far as real estate. So he was a very smart man back in his day. Obviously, he helped develop the atomic bomb back in the 1940s, but he was just a very smart individual. I don't think we have anybody else like Albert Einstein besides, I mean, I would say Stephen Hawking. Elon Musk, kind of pushing it. I mean, he's a genius, but his political views and his social views are different. But then again, it's a different generation. So, but going to this quote, so he has a famous quote, and he calls it the eighth wonder of the world. And have you heard of that?
Uh, I have heard about this quote. I didn't, not the eighth wonder of the world piece.
Yeah, I guess he said it's the eighth wonder of the world. So this quote is compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pay it he who doesn't pays it. So as far as real estate, how does that relate to this?
Well, I think that ultimately, the goal is to be able to have passive income, meaning that, you, at least this is the way that I look at it. You hold the property long enough to pay down the debt, and then, you're getting both the appreciation of the building, but then the building's kicking off cash flow over time. And then hopefully also you're investing that cash flow into sources that generate additional revenue. But I do think that the at least when we were going into Fuel and Iron, my orientation towards it was not let's buy it and then own it for a few years and then try to flip it for a profit, but more, let's buy it, operate it, try to pay down the debt service over time, and then hopefully it'll generate passive income after the debt service has been paid off. So, I think there are a lot of different ways to look at it, but that's the way that I try to look at real estate.
As far as like compound interest or just long term kind of thing, you wanted to appreciate, grow, and create passive income through time.
Yeah, more that way. Yeah, and I mean, I think the goal, is just to be able to put enough in the bank that you're just living off the interest of the money that you have, and so that's just kind of available in perpetuity to do. I'm a long way off from that, but that looking at it that way, that's really the ultimate goal.
Man, you're dropping knowledge on me, man, and I fuck with it. This is something a young entrepreneur, the vocabulary you have used is something I'm unfamiliar with, but it's good because it gets me exposed and it gets young entrepreneurs watching exposed to the type of vocabulary used in this world. So if someone's trying to level up their game or they're just getting into it and they listen to this and they hear your verbiage, they're like, wow, I don't necessarily know that. Like, for example, one of the most universal words you can use that someone can understand on a basic entrepreneurial level is equity, right? I don't want to explain it because I'm not going to explain something I don't know 100% about. So I'll just give me a little quick definition of what that word means.
So in real estate, the equity is the part of the capital stack that you need to buy the building with that doesn't have fixed repayment, where the repayment of that equity is based on the performance of the project. So there's equity in debt by and large. Debt is money that needs to be repaid at a fixed rate over a fixed period of time. And equity is the part of the project that is investing in the potential upside, that if the project doesn't perform, they would lose everything. But if the project performs exceptionally, then they would get all of the residual profits of the project beyond what needs to be paid for the debt, which is always fixed.
So is it synonymous to like revenue?
Well, the revenue is the amount of money that a project generates in each given year. So you have there are two main financial statements. There's the balance sheet, and then there's a profit and loss statement. So the balance sheet is where equity is a part of the equation. So it's how much is something worth, how much do you need to pay on it, that's fixed, that's the debt, and then how much is left over that you have as equity.
So cash flow.
So not cash flow. So this is just like the overall value of the building.
Okay.
So let's just say that the value of the building goes up by $1 million. And the reason why the value of the building could go up by $1 million is because, just properties are trading more on a price per square foot over time. So, you could have the same amount of revenue being generated, the same amount of money being made for the building every year. Or I mean, maybe it's a totally vacant building, right? Maybe you have a totally vacant building and there's zero revenue being generated, but because of where the building is, if the overall value of real estate on a price per square foot basis goes up, you could, your equity in the building, the amount that the building's worth minus the debt on it, could go up even if the revenue is zero. So a statement of cash flows is, just like the actual cash coming in the door. So there are things that could go on a profit and loss statement that, is money maybe that's been accrued, like if you're using accrual basis accounting, it could be money that you've booked as income, but hasn't actually come in the door. The money hasn't actually been earned. So, a cash flow statement is actually what money are you putting in your bank account? But, the equity in something is just, what's it worth minus what do you have to pay off on it, whether or not it's generating any revenue or not.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. So Grant Cardone has a very famous way of looking at real estate, right? So he says it's all about the deal. In your perspective, is that true? Is it about the deal? Is it about finding the right deal, right? That could be in what kind of market is it in? Where is it located? What are you trying to do? How much is it right now? How much can it be worth? Is it really all about the deal in your perspective?
Yeah, 100%. Because real estate is worth different amounts in different locations. And, different property types can be incredibly valuable, even if they're not the coolest or sexiest building, even if they're not in the best market. So it really is all about the deal. There's a concept in commercial real estate called the cap rate. And a cap rate is the net operating income of a building divided by its value. And so, the higher a cap rate is, the more income a building will kick out relative to what you pay for it. So, if you can get a building at a really high cap rate, it will generally perform better than a building at a really low cap rate, even though, the buildings at a really low cap rate, they're a lot more stable. You have a lot more confidence that the tenant that's in those buildings or the tenants that are in those buildings will be there for a long time. And that's why they're sold for relatively, they're generating relatively low income relative to their value. Whereas riskier properties, you can generally get them at a higher cap rate because, there's a higher probability that, a tenant leaves or defaults, and that revenue isn't sustainable, or it's not in as attractive of a market, and the risk is that the properties won't go up in value in that part of town as much as somewhere else. So it is really all about the deal, and not necessarily from a pure real estate play, but the Holmes Hardware building in downtown Pueblo, being a really prominent retail building on the main street, is a lot sexier than Fuel Kitchens, which is an industrial building on the east side of Pueblo, kind of tucked away on the end of an industrial street that, because it literally dead ends at the building, you would never go past unless you're going to the building. But it may be that Fuel Kitchens ends up being a much better investment because, the revenue generated is high, could be higher, and the cost of the building could be a lot lower. So it really just depends on the situation, and a cap rate, or another way to look at it is called the cash on cash return. Just simply, how much money do you get at the end of the day after paying your debt service and all of your expenses relative to what you pay for a building. Those are good ways to evaluate the potential of a project. And even if it's a totally unsexy building, if it's something that allows you to generate a good bit of revenue, you can then sell the building generally because of cap rates. You might be able to sell the building for a lot more than you paid for it, even if it, is not the most prominent or sexiest building on paper.
How do you find a good deal?
For me, as a principal, I've never been a pure real estate investor. I've been more of an owner user of real estate, where meaning that the buildings that we've gone into, and Fuel Kitchens we don't own, we lease, and then the Fuel and Iron Homes Hardware building we own. But it's always been about finding the building that's right for a specific use. For Fuel and Iron Homes Hardware building, it was a food hall. For Fuel Kitchens, it was a commissary kitchen. So I've always looked at what's the right real estate for that use that's been affordable both to get into and to renovate to the purpose that we are looking for. But if you're looking at it as from a pure investor point of view, it's not something that I've been involved in as much. But it's just, I think, having a good feel of is this a building that will be a good fit over time for the use that you're targeting for. And for instance, the field that I've always been in is in food and beverage. And so the trend for food and beverage spaces is that restaurants have been getting smaller. And, a lot of times they've been looking at more like fast casual or pickup, grab and go models versus full sit down restaurants, a little more casual versus fine dining. So if there was a restaurant space that I was evaluating as an investor, I would be a lot more attracted to a building that has, 3 2,000 square foot restaurant spaces, for instance, versus one 6,000 square foot restaurant space. Because number one, I think a 2,000 square foot restaurant would be a lot more leasable than a 6,000 square foot restaurant. And, if you had one 6,000 square foot tenant and that tenant went under and it took you a year to lease it out to somebody else, you could easily go under in that time period that, you're waiting for one single user. Whereas having a few different users, it would be, you'd be diversifying your risk a lot more, because, even if one went out, you'd have other tenants that would be able to keep paying rent. So, I think it's really just being an expert in a particular category of real estate and just knowing it better than anybody else, and just really understanding what the users, what the tenants in that field are looking for, and finding products that, have what the tenants are looking for, where they're looking for it, and, making a bet that that type of building will appreciate over time because it's going in line with what the users ultimately want.
Man, I want to just take a second and let that digest, because that is exactly the information that I'm looking for, that I've been searching through different entrepreneurs, and it's just so informative and so educational that, like I said, sometimes you just gotta take a second to let it digest. You know what I mean? So, I got a few more questions before we head on out of here. One of them is a big question I have. So if I'm starting out in real estate and I'm looking for funding, but my credit score is low and I don't know where to start. How can I get started in real estate? And how can I find that funding?
I think there are a number of ways that a a lender or an investor would look at a deal, but I think one, if you yourself are not the strongest borrower, if you have a really low credit score and that might disqualify you from getting a commercial loan, then I think there are a few different levers that you can pull. One of which is the if you're not making a lender as comfortable because of who you are as a borrower, then you have to make them more comfortable on the deal and what that looks like. So if you find a property that has a lease in place with a tenant, or multiple leases in place with a tenant, you can get the lender really confident that that tenant is going to be a winner, and that you have incredible knowledge in the space, and that even if they leave, it's a product type that's really under high demand. That's one way to potentially get a lender over the hump. And then another one is, there's a metric, loan to value or loan to cost. And, lenders will be more comfortable in making a loan the less money they're lending relative to the value of the building. Meaning that if, at a certain point they say, hey, even if you can't make the payments and we have to take over the building, we're lending such a relatively low percentage of the project that we can sell the building in a foreclosure sale and make back our money. So actually our risk is fairly low, even though the borrower is risky. And even if maybe the deal is, risky, but, we did an appraisal, the building is worth this much. We're only lending, 30% of that. And so the chance that we actually lose money is really low because, even if we sell it at a fire sale, we'll probably get at least 30% of what, of what the building's worth. So, those are just generally, some ways to maybe overcome if you're not the strongest borrower. Of course, also you can bring on somebody else who's a lot stronger to co-sign with you on a loan if you really believe in them, that they'll be a good partner and they really believe in the project. But the loan to value and just the strength of the tenant and the property and your knowledge of the type of property you're looking at, those are all ways that you could try to overcome that.
What if I don't have a tenant? I have no properties, but I found a deal. Let's say it's a fix and flip. This building is super trashed. It has no windows, needs some renovation. It's going to cost, I don't know, $40,000 to $60,000 a renovation, but the value of this home is going to go up, after the renovations, and I can sell this home for, I don't know, if I'm finding a lender and I'm like, hey, I need like $20,000 for a down payment so that way I can buy this $60,000 home and I can renovate it. I can't really do all the numbers right now, but let's say I renovate it and then I flip it for, this is all hypothetical, either $160,000 to $200,000 depending on where it is in the market. Is this all something I would have to have down to a T? Like, hey, I need to bring you the numbers or the details specifically down to a T to be able to get your trust as a lender to give me the money so that way I can be able to renovate this and flip this.
I think it's fair to say I've never been in this particular situation, but just doing fix and flips for houses. But I would think if I were a lender, I would want to say, okay, great. You think it's going to be $60,000 to renovate, and you're going to sell it for a certain amount. Well, what justification do you have that it's going to be $60,000? Have you, do you have plans? Have you gone to a contractor and have you gotten a firm bid on that. I'm going to want to take a look at that bid. Do I think this bid is actually really detailed? Have they really gone through line item by line item and really looked at what it would take to fix? Or is it just kind of a number that they've thrown on a piece of paper and it could be wildly inaccurate? And then, okay, what justification do you have for what you can sell it for? What are some comps in the same neighborhood, with a similar profile that have actually sold for the amount that you can think that, you're going to sell this property for? And then, of course, the less experience you have, the more I'm going to probably discount that. It's like, okay, you're going to, you think it's going to cost 60,000 and, you're going to sell it for 200,000, okay, I'll imagine maybe you'll sell it for, 180,000, and, instead of costing 60,000, it'll cost 90,000, and if you kind of miss on both sides, do those numbers still work? Or are you really on a knife's edge? And if you don't hit those numbers exactly, does the deal just fall apart? So, I think, if I were a lender, I would imagine, I'm looking at it, and this is the assumption that, you as a borrower don't have the personal equity to cover any losses, because if you as a borrower had a net worth of $1 million, that's liquid. If you had $500,000 sitting in a bank account and you're borrowing $60,000 and you sign a personal guarantee for that $60,000, I'd probably lend you the money even if that number is wildly inaccurate, because I know that I could collect from you personally even if you can't repay the loan. But if I'm imagining that you're a borrower that doesn't have much personal net worth, I think I just want to understand, how much have you done your homework? To what extent are the numbers that you're putting forward, either based on, previous experience, or, do you have an ironclad bid? Do you have an ironclad appraisal or market study, be called an as complete appraisal with the work done to the house that you are going to put into it. And then I'm going to put a buffer on both sides and see if I still think the numbers would work after I did that.
Does this go across all real estate deals, that philosophy?
I would imagine that it would. The nice part about a house is that there are generally a lot of buyers for houses. Whereas, something that you might do, is just incredibly niche, and you might not be able to find a buyer for something like that. If you were going to do the same thing for another building and you're going to say, hey, I want to just kind of like fix and flip this into a food hall, or, fix and flip this into, something that would be super specialized, and there just aren't a lot of buyers out there for that type of real estate, then, it wouldn't probably work in the same way. Or if it's just like a category that is just really struggling, and that you're like, hey, even if the numbers hypothetically on paper make sense, I just don't think there's going to be the demand for it. Like if you wanted to build out a new office building, for instance, and all of the trends are saying, people aren't going to the office, people are downsizing office space and working from home, that could be really an uphill battle, even if, on paper, you could point to, hey, that these office spaces are leasing for this amount. But even so, a lender might just say, I just don't think the market needs more office space right now. The vacancy rates are climbing. People are working from home. No matter how much research you do, I just don't believe in office. I'm just not gonna do the deal. So I think it cuts across all classes to an extent, but it also just depends on the desirability of that class in the market. Homes are always going to be desirable in the sense that there are always a lot of buyers for it, but on the commercial side, it could vary a lot more substantially.
Man, you've had a very optimistic and positive attitude throughout this whole episode. Is that a character trait you've always possessed, growing up? Or is that something that kind of like you, I guess, learned throughout your experiences in life?
I think it stayed mainly consistent. I think there's just so much that can go wrong starting up a new business, and such a high failure rate that if you're not optimistic, I think you could tell yourself 100 reasons why you shouldn't do it, and those reasons are probably very valid. But I think you have to have a certain level of optimism to be able to say, despite the odds, despite the risks, I think I'm going to be successful.
I like that philosophy. One more thing before we get out of here. So, to the younger generation watching, what is one piece of advice you would give them starting their entrepreneurial journey early on?
I would just say it's really helpful to become an expert in the thing that you want to do ultimately to give yourself that credibility. And that's something that, I think I did in some respects and wish I could have done a lot more in others. But, especially when you're young and have a lot more flexibility, if, you think that what you want to do is open up a restaurant, go work in restaurants and see if that's something that you actually want to do. Or, if you want to start a hot sauce company, go try to work for, do sales for another food brand and see if that's something you want to do and you really enjoy. And, the more expertise you have on a subject, ultimately, the more credibility that you'll have on it. And, the more that you'll be able to spot opportunities that other people will miss because, they're just, it's so much of it is subtlety and nuance and just, having an understanding of where things are going. And if you don't have the expertise in a certain industry to really understand what it's like to be in that industry, what users in that industry are looking at, it just makes it so much harder to have the expertise that you'll need to ultimately spot a deal that other people are passing over for one reason or another.
I'm going to carry on to that question. Is there one piece of financial advice that someone or a mentor has told you that has stuck with you for the rest of your life? If so, what is that piece of financial advice you would tell someone watching?
I guess nothing really revolutionary, but I maybe just on the personal financial advice, just going back to the compound interest, the point that you made about compound interest. When I got my first job coming out of college, and I moved in with at that time my girlfriend, now my wife, and so we had two incomes in a really small house. But we also had really like very few expenses relative to what we have now. So even though we weren't making nearly as much as we would make later in our careers, I was never able to save as much as I was right when I first got started, just because on the expense side everything was super low. And so what I would say is, yeah, the more that you can save early, especially before you have responsibilities like kids and things of that nature that not only are expensive in their own right, but also kind of balloon the rest of your expenses. That's a great opportunity to try to be able to save. And the more you can save earlier, of course, that will balloon over time and put you in a much better position because of what you're talking about with compound interest. So of course not everybody's in that situation. Everyone has different circumstances, but I've never made as little or felt as relatively rich as I was when I first got out of college and had that first job, and just felt like I'd never made money before. I'd never had like a real income, and the expenses were relatively low. And so I'd say if you're in that situation, you could take advantage of that situation and start putting money away. That'll really behoove you in the long run.
Nathan, you have dropped a lot of good advice on me today, and I'm sure the people watching are gonna appreciate this advice because, again, like I was saying, it was a lot of verbiage that I'm unfamiliar with, but along my journey and learning, financial literacy, learning how money works, how to leverage money, it is going to be beneficial going back, listening to this, and trying to dissect the different words that you've said so that way it can make me a better investor at the end of the day. So I just want to say thank you for the knowledge you dropped, and thank you for coming on, Nathan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you having me. And yeah, hopefully, had a great conversation and hopefully it can be helpful for some people.
Absolutely. I definitely enjoyed this conversation. There's definitely a lot of more questions. I wouldn't say a lot of more. There's definitely some other questions that I've had popped up. I'm gonna have to go back through this episode and, write down questions I've had so that way I can ask you in the future. But until then, if you would like people to find you on social media, is there a specific place they can find you on social media?
Yeah, the main thing, it's really kind of woeful on social media, honestly. But Fuel Kitchens, we do have a Facebook and Instagram page. More B2B, so less focused on social media. I'm also horrible at posting on social media personally, honestly. So I'm not the most findable or active, but we hopefully will be more active on Fuel Kitchens in the future. But if I could just urge people to support the food hall, and keep coming down and supporting local businesses in general. They're a lot more active. They're doing incredible work. So I would say follow the food hall on Facebook and Instagram and keep supporting your local businesses.
People have been loving the food hall. I can tell you firsthand, going down Union on Friday, Saturday night, even Sunday and Mondays. Honestly, it's kind of hit or miss throughout the week, but Wednesdays are really good too. Going down to the food hall, there's a good bunch of people just there to get some food and, enjoy company with other people. So it's been a big hit, and the community of Pueblo really appreciates someone like yourself bringing that to, especially downtown Pueblo, because it brings a whole new vibe, a whole new life to Pueblo, especially in this kind of older building. It gives a little history every time you walk through those doors, and to see where it was to where it is now, just gives you a whole new activity to do on a weekend with your family downtown in Pueblo. So I can tell you from experience and from observations that it's been good. It's been really good.
Awesome. Well, that's great, and thank you for your support. And let's just keep building Pueblo, one business, one dream at a time.
Absolutely. Well, guys, you've heard it here. You've heard financial advice. You've heard the mindset behind what it takes to be an entrepreneur in real estate, in commercial real estate. You've learned a little bit about Nathan Stern right here, the owner of Fuel and Iron, not the food hall, but the whole building itself, the steps he's taken. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Xander. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it. You can find me on all social medias, The All In Show. Give me a follow everywhere else. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.